Yo, what is going on, guys? You got your boy Aaron2for20 bringing you guys the trades and transactions going into week 6 of the WBE, and we have a lot of them, so grab your popcorn and sit down real good because, oh my god, we have so many transactions this week. So, if you enjoy, make sure to, of course, leave a like down below and comment your thoughts on all the trades and transactions this week. Without further ado, let's just jump right into it. First up, we have Steve, coach of the Milwaukee Sawsbucks, the Draft League inventor himself, and he is dropping Shiinotic, Vaporeon, and Hitmonlee to pick up Chestnut, Alolan Persian, and Armaldo. So every time the Alolan Persian has entered the market, Steve has been trying to pick it up, and he finally ended up making a transaction that could actually work for it. So I'm sure that Steve is very happy to finally have this mon on his roster. It seems like something that was really important for him, actually, considering how much effort and how many drafts of transactions he's put in just to get it. And I kind of like it on his team. It's a nice option to pivot into Politoed, which of course then gives him Rain for his Mega Swampert, and even a Quillfish and Armaldo possible sweep, which is really nice for Steve, of course, in terms of team synergy. It's also really nice just defensive mon, which between that and Chestnut takes a little bit of the physically defensive pressure off of Clefable, so it can maybe run a more Spadef set alongside Politoed if need be. I also like the Armaldo pickup that he got this week as well, because Armaldo gives him yet another Swift Swim option, so he doesn't need to necessarily rely on Mega Swampert and Quillfish for Rain Sweepers. Armaldo can, of course, pick up the slack. It's also a nice hazard removal option, as Steve's only other removal option on this roster was Thundurus, and beforehand Hitmonlee, but comparatively, Armaldo at least is a better spinner. While not necessarily a better mon than Hitmonlee, it's at least a better rapid spinner. And I think that at least as a fighting type for Steve's roster, Chestnut also will actually support a lot better as well. Being nice switch into a lot of opposing water types that would otherwise try and take advantage of Rain. Grass defensively, of course, is really clean. And Spiky Shield plus Seeds is really nice, especially with Spiky Shield being able to hit the physical foes really hard with the chip from Spiky Shield contact. In general, it's really nice. The synergy is a little off with Steve's team in general, but I think it's definitely better than what he had, and especially what he had before Quillfish as well. I think that he's definitely making necessary improvements to make this more of a Rain team that can actually function. His speed tiers are definitely better. He has more hazards as well now with spikes from Chestnut. He also had spikes from Quillfish last week. He has rocks from Armaldo. So his hazard options are definitely better than they were before, as he dropped no hazard setters and picked up 2 really good ones. So I think that in general will benefit Steve as well. That takes a lot of pressure off of Mega Swampert if they run rocks every week. So yeah, I think that Steve's definitely going to be doing good. One thing that I do worry about a little bit is a strong electric type with any sort of coverage for Thundurus. That could be a little bit nerve-wracking for Steve. However, he does still counterplay, of course, so it won't be the worst thing in the world. But of course, any sort of electric type that could run Thunder versus Steve's team will definitely give him a run for his money if it can also hit Thundurus and Swampert, which wouldn't necessarily be the hardest thing to do in the world. As long as it's either grass coverage or ice coverage, you can run Hidden Power for the other, and that'll at least put pressure on both of those mons, especially with some hazard stacking versus Steve. It would be a little unfortunate, but I think he can still muscle past a lot of the things that he was having trouble with beforehand. I think his team overall will be a lot more beneficial to Steve, just in terms of how he plays and just the synergy in general. Of course, it has more momentum now than it did before, as I don't believe that Baton Pass was allowed, which if that was the case, then Vaporeon would have been just dead weight, whereas Persian will at least add another momentum on. So yeah, I'm looking forward to Steve's trades and transactions. Next up, we have Duncan Kneedeep, coach of the Free State Torracats, and Duncan has a lot of trades this week as well. So Duncan is dropping Xatu, Stoutland, and Vikavolt, and he's picking up Xurkitree, Sableye, and Ferroseed. And not only that, but he's moving Zygarde 10% from the Tier 2 slot that he had it in originally to the Tier 3 slot, which is just a free pick. So Duncan had originally in the season not drafted a Tier 2 mon, and because there were people who had the option, should it came down to it, to have drafted a Tier 2 mon over a Tier 1 mon, if the Tier 1 mons had just run out completely, Duncan had ended up putting Zygarde in his Tier 2 slot instead of a Tier 3 slot, because there weren't any Tier 2 mons that fit his team. Now, as Xurkitree was around, Duncan felt that this would actually be a good option for him, so he dropped Vikavolt, of course, for Xurkitree, and he ended up picking up Ferroseed and Sableye, which helped Duncan's team a lot in terms of the utility department. They're very nice utility mons in general, able to put a lot of pressure on teams. Ferroseed, of course, with Seeds as well as dual hazards and rocks and spikes. It gets nice knockoff support. It's a really hard mon to kill. Not only that, but in terms of the fire weakness that Ferroseed has, Duncan has a Raccoon on his team, which between Water Bubble and being a defensive water type in general, is actually will help synergize really well with Ferroseed in my opinion. In terms of the knockoff weakness, not necessarily because it's a weak to dark type mon, but because of the fact that it isn't a Violite that puts a lot of pressure on it to be abused by knockoff users. He does have Mega T-Tar, which is a great knockoff switch in, considering not only is it a Mega, so it doesn't need to worry about losing an item, but it's also a Dark Resist, which helps a lot in that department. So I think this will benefit Duncan a lot. Not only that, but Sableye as well is just nice to apply status pressure to a team. Also, taunt support with Prankster is phenomenal to stop setup sweepers from possibly taking advantage of Duncan, as his team definitely could be... It's frail enough to where a Mon, if it got like a speedy setup option, would hurt Duncan. And obviously Sableye can pressure them before that ends up being a thing. Also, it stops hazards from being set versus Duncan as well, as currently his only removal options are Defog Lurantis and Hitmontop with Rapid Spin. And beforehand, I mean, his only removal was Xatu and Hitmontop. So I think that this at least will help. What is Xatu, Hitmontop, and Lurantis, my bad. But in general, though, I think the Sableye will help pressure a lot of what Duncan, at least on paper, would be having trouble with. And of course, Duncan's been running a lot of memes, so I'm expecting some fire Sableye sets from him this season. I think it's definitely very possible. Next up, we're going to go to In Vivid Color. Coach's House Tech is Sableye's, and he's dropping Barbaracle for Poliwrath. Now, in terms of Vivid's roster, I'm not necessarily sure why he did this. Vivid has a really strong fighting type in Hawlucha, which is phenomenal with the fact that he also has Tapu Bulu. Poliwrath, of course, is still a really clean Mon for Tier 5, and I think it can definitely offer some things to Vivid, such as a Water Absorb immunity, which is actually really nice, considering he does have a couple Water Weak Mons. Not necessarily a huge Water Weakness, but a couple. So it helps, I guess, with that. But I can't really see a lot that Poliwrath would necessarily offer Vivid over Barbaracle. Defensive fighting typing is nice. It's a really good Edgequake switching typing, because Hawlucha would be neutral to Stone Edge. So I guess there's that, because Vivid seems a little bit Edgequake weak, but even then, like, Bulu could still take on a lot of Mons that would be clicking Edgequake versus him in general. And even then, the ones that get flying coverage, such as like Aerodactyl and Bulu, they're going to hurt Bulu just as much as they would hurt Poliwrath. So it wouldn't have necessarily been for that reason either. I know Vivid also didn't really like Barbaracle in general because it required a lot of offensive positioning, which Vivid has mentioned he's not the biggest fan of doing and isn't the best at. So I guess that would be the reason for dropping Barbaracle, but in terms of just team synergy, I don't really get it. Barbaracle offered Vivid a nice rocker, which now his only rockers are Mew, Nidoking, and Aggron. And I feel like, at least with all three of those, there's a really big floor boost slot syndrome issue with setting rocks. Nidoking, while it can definitely fit rocks, if it's running a choice set, it's not the best option to lock yourself into rocks. And while it is definitely good in some matchups to just force rocks and then switch out, it's, again, not necessarily good to rely on Nidoking as your rocker. Mew should never be your team's reliable rocker. It should never be the thing that you are dedicating to only do a certain role. And with Vivid's team, Mega Aggron can obviously set rocks, and I think it's arguably his best rocker. I feel like that Mew will, in a fair amount of matches, be forced to be a rocker rather than just being able to set rocks. And the difference between that is pretty big, because if you're forced to run rocks, obviously, it's because nothing else viable can come to that matchup. And Mega Aggron is not a Mon you can bring every week. It's a Mon that can come to most matchups, but it cannot come to every week. Nidoking, again, cannot come to every week. It can come to most weeks, and I think on Vivid's team especially it'll come to most weeks, but it cannot come to every week. Not only that, but it cannot be a rocker nearly every week. It can maybe be like half the games. So something like Mew now, in more cases than not, needing to run hazards, because his only other hazards would be webs, is definitely really detrimental to Vivid. I think that defensively, having dropped Barbaracle for Poliwrath makes a little bit more sense, because his defensiveness on the team isn't the best. It would be Mew, Mega Aggron, which those two are really good. But then it gets to Bulu, and while Bulu is still a really good defensive Mon, in general, it's not a Mon you want to, again, lock to a defensive role. So I think that in general, Poliwrath can offer some things, but I feel like the trade was just like downgrade in general. There's not a lot that is really improved about it, but it does, of course, offer a little bit. Obviously, every trade offers some upside, and I think that Vivid's is at least that it gives him slightly more defensive capabilities, but not a ton more, I would say. In general, though, it's not a bad trade. I think that Barbaracle would have been better, but obviously if Vivid can't use it right, then might as well drop it for something else that he feels like he can use. And even if he doesn't know if he can use Poliwrath or not, at the very least, I'm sure that Vivid picked it up for a reason, even if it's just that he wanted to try it. So, more power to you, of course. If he just wants to try it, that's perfectly fine. I can never deny someone who wants to draft them on because they want to use it for fun. I've drafted plenty of LC Mons myself. Obviously, Poliwrath not being an LC Mon, but the fact more so just drafting Mons just to draft them rather than the fact that it makes more sense team synergy-wise. And as I said, I don't really get the synergy personally, besides the fact that he has a fighting, well, an edge quick switch other than like Bulu. But, and hey, more power to Vivid, of course. So next up, since I've been talking circles about that forever, we're going to go to John, coach of the New Orleans Pelipers. And John is making a fair amount of transactions this week. He's dropping Licky Licky, Sock, Slowbro, and Salazzle for Toxicroak, Magmar, Alakazam, and Vaporeon. So one of the things I really like about this is actually the fact that it gives him some really nice mixed offense. If you look at John's team, his team is really, really predictable in my opinion if you look on paper. Mence in most games is either going to be Dragon Dance or just like Defog, at least before transactions, I would say. It's really just one of those two options, I feel like. Licky Licky obviously was just going to be Cleric every week if it came. Sock, it's a very, very undiverse fighting type. It's not even like it could be a defensive fighting type. It's just going to be offensive every week with like Life Orb, Band, or Scarf. There's not a lot of options there. Maybe like some other lesser boosting item. But the point being either offensive item that boosts with choice of moves, Scarf, or Band. And that's pretty much it with Sock. That's all you really get. Slowbro, it's a nice wall. And I think a Slowbro definitely could have fit John's team pretty well. But I can definitely get why he dropped it for Vaporeon. And I'll get to that in a moment. And Salazzle, it can definitely offer some utility to John's team. But again, I think that this was honestly more so just done to pick up other things, such as Alakazam. Which again, more power to John, of course. Looking at what he got in return, though, Toxicroak obviously does still offer a poison immunity, which he would be losing from Salazzle. But it also offers us a lot more diverse of a fighting type. Toxicroak being a really nice mixed offensive mon, I feel like looking at John's team beforehand, his team definitely struggled with not having a good mixed offensive mon. His team was pretty predictable what was running what offense, so if you need to wall something, you need to prep for like both physical and special offenses on it. You just prep for one or the other, and in most cases you'd be good, besides the occasional special Ments and Decidueye. But Decidueye isn't the best offensive mon. It's not something I would necessarily say this can be offensive every week. It doesn't do enough on paper. But Toxicroak, at least, its coverage and its typing in general will allow it to actually do a lot, even though its offenses are in both cases worse than Decidueye. As I mentioned, Decidueye isn't the best offensive mon. But I feel like Toxicroaks go a lot farther because unlike Grass Ghost, which isn't the best offensive typing, fighting Poison is actually a really good offensive typing because Poison will obviously nail Fairies, which would obviously give normal fighting types a really big hard time. But also the fact that fighting in general is just such a spammable typing, has a lot of really high base power moves, and Toxicroak also does get some really nice priority options for things like Sucker Punch or Vacuum Wave, which will of course help John's team a lot since he's been running a lot of Scarf Diggersby. This can maybe give him some actual priority on the team that's viable, besides Scarf Quick Attack Diggersby. Not only that, but it gives him another Scarf option outside of just Diggersby, which I think is really nice. Decidueye with the Scarf is almost never going to happen. It has matchup in some cases, but again, not usually going to happen. Same for Magneton. It has some matchups, but it's not necessarily the most common or the easiest mon to bring as a Scarfer to every matchup. But Toxicroak is actually a really good Scarfer in a lot of cases, so I think that'll be really good for John to just get some actual use at Diggersby besides just Scarf, which will be very helpful. Not only that, but I think the Magmar getting picked up is really nice for John as well. A nice fire type. It'll help with just having an actual fairy switch in because his only other fairy switch in would be, I believe, Magneton, and that's it at this point. Because, of course, he did drop his resistant poison for a neutral poison being Toxicroak, which is neutral fairy. This does give him an actual fairy switch, which will be very important for Mence because Mence obviously does not like fairy types. Magneton is still a really good one at that, I'll give him that, but Magmar just being another option in case he needs it is comfortable, of course, to have. And I mean, just a good fire type in general, fire, water, grass is important, at least if it's done right. And while obviously it's overhyped how important it is, I think it still is an important core to have if you can get it, assuming it, again, synergizes well. And Magmar's a clean pick. I think that it can definitely offer a fair amount to John's team. I believe it gets Willow, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong in that one, though. But it does still have a good coverage move pool regardless, and I think that for a Tier 5 pick, there weren't a lot of better fire types if John really did want the fire typing itself. So I think Magmar was definitely a viable pickup. Now, Alakazam. I mentioned earlier that John needed some more mixed offense, and while Alakazam isn't necessarily a mixed offensive mon, this at the very least does give him an actual really strong special offensive presence. Because while Mega DNC obviously is a really, really strong special offensive presence, that was really where it ended for John's team. His next best special offense was either going for Slowbro or for Salazzle. And Salazzle does have special offensive capabilities, but when there are certain matchups when you just want to run a utility Salazzle with things like Taunt, Toxic, Sub, or just any sort of shenanigans like that, obviously it gets like Encore, and it can't necessarily be a special breaker every week. Whereas Mega Alakazam, well, not Mega Alakazam, regular Alakazam obviously can run Magikarp Life Orb, which is really clean, But it also does actually give John less of a need to necessarily remove hazards. Because while John didn't necessarily pick up or drop any removal options, his only other removal right now would be Decidueye and Salamence. Obviously, he can pressure hazards with Mega Diancie, but his only removal is Salamence and Decidueye, which Decidueye can obviously remove hazards pretty well, but Salamence isn't the Mon that I would necessarily think of as a go-to defogger in most matchups. So having a Mon that can sweep with a guaranteed sash, can always get off a guaranteed hit. It can even get off some nice moves like a sash counter set, of course, which is really clean for physical sweepers that could bother John's team instead of Mudsdale. I think that overall, I keep thinking Mega Alakazam. Regular Alakazam could offer a lot to John's team in both an offensive and a utility aspect, which would actually be nice because he is losing Salazzle, which is a really nice fast utility Mon. Regular Alakazam gets a lot of those same options, so I think that could help at least replace that void. Not, in my opinion, of the pickups, it wasn't the best one of the ones that John did, but it still does offer a lot to John's team. I think, as I mentioned, Toxic Oak was probably the best pickup that John did, but Zam is still a really good option on John's team. I think the offensive Psychic type will be very nice for him, and I can't wait to see how he does. And Vaporeon is actually going to be really beneficial as well to John's team, because now he has a backup Wish Passer, unlike Licky Licky, of course. Vaporeon can also come to a lot more matchups than Licky Licky can, in my opinion. Water Absorb, really nice ability, especially with Mudsdale. The defensive synergy with Mudsdale is really, really good, in my opinion. Wish Pass is going to be very necessary to keep Mudsdale alive, and I feel like that's a really crucial Mon in John's roster. It's a really important rocker. It's a really important physical wall as well. And Vaporeon can actually fill the special wall really nicely on this team because of the physical walls that John does have through Mudsdale. And even just in terms of physically defensiveness, I guess, Intimidate, Mence. But I think that Vaporeon could definitely fulfill a special wall overall on this team really well. And between Vaporeon and Mudsdale, that's actually a really hard core to break outside of good grasses, which John does pressure grass as well. Between Magmar, he has obviously Z-Ment, and even then, Zam can still pressure a lot of grasses pretty well, which is a strong psychic move. Not a lot of strong grasses would stop Alakazam, necessarily. Well, more so just be, like, not necessarily weak to Zam's typing. But I think that in general, the defensive core, as I said, outside of grasses, is actually pretty good. In general, I think that John's transactions were really solid. Obviously, it sucks not having Slowbro, but it seemed like John also was really adamant about switching his Psychic and Water from just being on the same Mon. So again, more power to him. That's another reason why I think the Zam trade is fine. Not the best Psychic he would have gotten, because I would have still gotten defensive Psychic, but it still works for John, of course. It still is a really good Psychic to have, of course, because it's not like Zam is a bad Mon. So I think that will be really nice for John. Overall, I think that besides Toxic Oak, he didn't necessarily gain or lose anything necessarily from picking up the mons he did. I feel like obviously it was more so just replacing roles he was losing in the end, rather than like if it was a worse or better transaction. But I think that getting Toxic Oak at least improves John's team. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how John does. John's record is obviously 3-2, so that's still really good. Not like he needed to make transactions, but I think in general, just trying to get out of the bubble of running the same sort of sets such as Diggersby every week with just Choice Scarf, which it seems like he was known for bringing at this point. Especially if you watched Pokemon, I know he mentioned it in his stream the other day, where John was bringing a lot of Scarf Diggersby. So I think obviously in that regard, this will help John get some more diversity in his roster. If you guys enjoyed this week's transactions, of course, leave a like down below. I would love to hear your thoughts on all these transactions this week. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you guys thought my reasoning was good enough. If you guys have your own reasoning, of course, I would love to read it down below. And I'll see you guys later. Peace out, guys.